in the IBS space and is a little bit resistant to the idea that like maybe stress or anxiety is driving their symptoms.
So I've certainly gotten referrals from GI docs, but not as often as you might think. Actually, most of my referrals for GI symptoms come from GI specific RDs, right? So dietitians who specialize in gut health are sending them my way, but I do have relationships with a couple of good GI docs, but for the most part, I'm not getting those referrals from GI docs, which is surprising to me because when I do talk to them, they, I think, are frustrated in working with their patients because they don't know how to fix them. And the GI docs that I've developed a relationship with are like, thank goodness I know you because I don't know what to do to help them. Go talk to Julia, right? So, sorry, what was your question? What would I tell them about? Oh, right. So a lot of times when that initial phone call, they'll say, why do I need to see a shrink, right? Like, why do I need to go see a psychologist or a mental health professional? And so we then start talking about how their anxiety can manifest in their physical body, right? Like, there's so many physical symptoms. And I know we had talked about like maybe touching on the limbic system and the role that plays and how that allows those symptoms to show up in the body. But it really is helping people understand that mind-body connection and that your mental health, good or bad, right, can show up physically in the body. Well, I don't want to say good or bad, right? Like that's the black and white thinking that gets us in trouble. But but when you're starting to have stress in the body and that shows up in a physical way, that there are definitely things that we can do to target your thinking and your behavior that can improve the way that those things are happening in your mind, and then that translates to those physical symptoms in the body. So I find a lot of clients, once we understand that, once I'm able to explain that, then they get a little bit more on board that you're not coming to me because you're crazy. You're not coming to me because these symptoms are just in your head. We know that cognitive behavioral therapy can actually improve your gut symptoms in a direct way. Because of the way that this shows up in your brain. Your brain translates this emotional experience physically into your body, and we're able to, which is wild to me, we can use your thinking and behavior to affect what's going on in your brain and therefore affect what's happening in your gut.
Talk a little bit about something that we see with our clients is that the food anxiety becomes an animal in and of itself that we have to really pay attention to working with our clients' patients, because if we don't overcome if we can't overcome food fears, it's really hard to move forward. So talk a little bit about that. That'd be really great.
Yeah. So I mean, if we're just thinking about avoidance, it's classic avoidance, right? So we start labeling certain foods as dangerous because for whatever reason, right? And you guys maybe I see it like that those foods are going to create symptoms,
right.
Or they're going out to dinner and they can't eat this, or this because they, don't want to have an episode or have to run to the bathroom or whatever, right? There's all kinds of things that get labeled. So the way that those foods are labeled as dangerous or off limits or whatever, right? So the thinking around those foods becomes inaccurate, right? And so then we experience anxiety as a result of that thinking. And so then we avoid it and we steer clear of it. And then it just gets scarier and scarier and scarier the longer you stay clear of it. So this comes up for me a lot with clients that are referred by dietitians because this is impeding the dietitian's ability to work effectively with their clients because the clients are afraid of adding in new foods. And I have to say, like, I have a lot of clients that are not easily convinced that this is a great idea. to start, we know scientifically that the diversity of foods in your diet is good. And we want to increase the diversity of foods to increase the lots of good gut bacteria, right? But I think that this is a real challenge for people because they're afraid. They're very afraid to add those foods in about what the reaction or the results are going to be. The other thing that I think too happens is where we're trying to decide if that food really is off limits. And you guys can probably speak to this a little better than I, but like we sometimes we're going to have some symptoms initially if you reintroduce something, and we want to see what happens, but then we want to do it again even if some of those symptoms arose, right? Because your body is adjusting to what happens
Hmm.
the first and second. Yeah, I'm right here. So,
Yes.
yep. So we want to try it, then we want to try it again, we want to try it again. And maybe there are foods that your body just doesn't like and you don't want, but I find that most of the time that's not the case. That as you're reintroducing that thing, we want to get people back to a place where they can eat anything and everything, unless they really do have an intolerance, which of course some people do. But
Right.
we can test for those, and we would know if they have an intolerance, right?
Yeah,
Right.
and that's the thing. Like, if you have an allergy, or if you have like
Yeah.
celiac disease like me, or if you
Yes.
have some overt sensitivity thing where your immune system sees the food and goes bonkers,
Yep.
then like, yeah, take that out at least for a while.
Yep.
I mean, some of those can go away too, but yeah, if it's like this measly intolerance where it's like, oh, if I eat one bite of avocado, it's actually okay, but if I eat like three avocados, I get bloated and diarrhea. It You could start by just dipping your toe in the water and having just a bite, but it can be the most difficult step to get somebody to trust the process or trust you to a point where they're willing to eat that bite,
Mm-hmm.
because there's so much dogma and BS, especially in the SIBO and the IBS world, where it's like, oh, the FODMAP foods are bad
Yep.
and
Yeah.
grades are bad, and like, it's oftentimes not truthful, even if the food is causing symptoms for you in that moment.
Yep.
There's a reason for that. It's not that the food is evil or the
Yep.
food is bad. It's not like onions are cackling and saying like, ha 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 ha, ha, let's make her miserable. Like, it's just, it's a food, and help your body process it better, but like trust that your body will be able to process it better, I guess, is like the leap
Yep.
that is really hard for people to take.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And something you're pointing out, Nikki, is that I said this earlier, that I even fell into the trap of that, of saying it's black and white thinking, good or bad,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
it's very easy for us to simplify things, and very rarely is that ever true, right? There's so much gray. And so we label everything that's not white, that's not perfect, that doesn't that has we have our
Mm-hmm.
body has no reaction whatsoever. It's bad, 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 bad,
Yeah.
right? And there's so much more context to that that gets missed and gets lost
Yeah.
in, yeah. So it's really helpful to identify those thinking errors, have people realize that maybe they're not thinking about that in the most accurate way, challenge that with behaviors by eating a bite of avocado, see what's
Mm-hmm.
happening. And then even if they're having some symptoms from that, like, how do we flesh out what that could possibly mean aside from the
Yeah.
fact that it's bad?
The idea of like cheats, like, oh, can I cheat today, or
Yeah.
and I think even just the subtle change of like referring to things that you typically refer to as cheats as treats, like
Yeah.
if you feel like you're cheating because you're having like some ice cream or whatever it is, like,
Yeah.
that should be a treat, something that you would enjoy. Like, I think there's nothing wrong with having foods that you enjoy and that taste good. And yeah, it's a tricky. I think it's tricky when so much of the messaging is guilt tripping and like this ideal of perfection from like just the wellness industry in general, but then you get into the IBS space too, where like um, the fears are there and things like that that prevent it. But